make decisions that are going to make you happy, right? And that's not necessarily the decision that's going to mean you're paid the most. The sales in market research is very consultative. It's about really understanding customer needs and requirements. It was a huge risk, right? Because I was going from a well-paid job with a high profile, managing, a lot of fantastic people, to join a company that was very much a scrappy sort of startup.
Welcome to the Early Insights podcast, an opportunity to understand what it takes to build a career in the data, research and insight sector, and the many different ways to do so. I'm your host, Lewis Reeves, founder and CEO of Walr. And today, for our very first podcast in the series, we have a fantastic guest, an early pioneer of the European online sample scene, someone that has seen a startup the entire way through to IPO, and now works with some of the most exciting technology businesses in our sector, none other than Richard Thornton. Big welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Lewis. Thank you. Great to be here.
Richard, to get into this, what I'm really keen to do as we think about early insights is to take you back, not too long, I hope, but to an 18-year-old Richard. You're finishing up your sixth form, you're considering your options going forward. You decide to take business and marketing here in London for your degree. What were you thinking at that point in time? Where did you think that would take you?
Yeah, I'd like to think it was a sort of well thought through, very detailed sort of process that I was in at the time, having sort of left school, thinking about sort of what next. Did I go down the sort of further education route into university, or actually get into a trade or straight into sort of working career? I actually wanted to, I guess, in a way, follow the path of my father, who'd sort of been in the corporate world all of his life, and that sort of, having seen him do that, appealed to me immensely. So I guess at that stage, I'd sort of figured out that I wanted to probably go and study in sort of business and sort of marketing, or that sort of arena, and then from there, hopefully, use that sort of degree and those learnings to get into, I guess, sort of a similar role and job that my father had in the corporate world. That was, I think, the thinking at the time. There was obviously a temptation to potentially go traveling. Two older brothers were backpacking around Asia and Australia at the time, so that was quite tempting. But actually, I stayed closer to home and decided to pursue the university route.
Fantastic. And that university degree then takes you into your very first job, and you went straight into the world of market research. So what was the appeal? What was the attraction? How did that process work?
I guess I'm one of those rare individuals that actually got some value from their degree, right? And used the degree I studied for and was able to apply it quite early on. So yeah, I did. I left my studies here in London and landed a role as a research analyst. I wasn't entirely sure what that would entail initially going in. I knew sort of it would be working with clients and data and have a sort of analytical kind of backbone to the role. And actually, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But if I fast forward now, sort of 25 years later, the fundamentals I learned in that role have held me in good stead, actually, in being reapplied over and over in subsequent roles and businesses. So yeah, I sort of went in as a research analyst. It was in a different sector though to market research or insights. I actually worked for a strategic consulting business that was serving the likes of Hewlett Packard, Xerox, Canon, some of the big global brands in what was then known as the digital imaging space. And the proposition was really a syndicated sort of subscription-based offering, where we would produce sort of market sizing and market forecast reports for those businesses, and then provide consulting around the data and the analytics. So, very relevant to the later market research world that I would join, and a lot of the sort of practices and principles that would be applied in businesses like Ciao and Cint that I went on to work for.
Yeah, and great point there. We come on to the next step in your career, moving along to Ciao, and I think there's two hugely interesting components for me. One of which I'd love to hear your view. You moved from being a real practitioner as a researcher into a more commercial role. It'd be interesting to get your perspective there. Secondly, you made what seems now as a masterstroke of a move into this world of online sample that was truly in its infancy back then, and it would be great to get what excited you about that move. Must have been a lot of risk
Yeah.
involved to go there. So maybe we'll tackle that first, and then come to that hinging career to a commercial role.
Yeah, sure. So, again, you sort of look back and would like to think that everything was meticulously planned out and every decision was, a very well thought through strategic decision. I mean, sometimes life presents you with opportunities that you simply need to just grab. And I've been fortunate to be, I guess, in the right place at the right time at certain junctures in my career to be able to capitalize on those opportunities and thankfully have, other individuals and businesses that have seen something in me and believed in me to sort of also take a punt as well. Because I think there's always a high degree of risk in any big decisions that businesses and individuals make that are in hindsight key milestones in their sort of journey. So when I come back to how I got into market research and specifically joined Ciao back in 2003, I didn't really know a huge amount about the sort of traditional research industry. I'd been a research analyst, but in a very different sector, and applying, I guess, a set of skills that market research would recognize, but in a world that for me was far removed from the one that I was about to join. So the move to Chow was very risky for me. I was actually living in London, commuting to Luton, doing about a 4-hour round trip a day for the research analyst role. Extremely happy there. Had been well looked after and almost sort of mothered in that first role. I was one of only two gentlemen in the business, and so it had a very sort of caring, sort of motherly sort of environment, and I think that served me very, very well in those sort of formative years. Learned a huge amount in terms of technical skills and the practice of business and sort of research, but also saw what a good culture could do in terms of encouragement, motivation, and I guess sort of understanding very early on sort of that sense of kind of purpose and worth within a role, which it takes a lot of people sometimes a long time to kind of find, if they ever find it. So very fortunate and grateful that I had that in that first role, and I think that served me well when I went to Chow. So I was headhunted. I took a call from a recruiter, and as I said, was very happy in my job, and the pitch intrigued me. It was an opportunity to get back into London and work centrally. It was an opportunity to work for a technology company that appeared to be sort of pioneering or trying to reimagine the way that, in Chow's case, data was being collected to serve the insight sector. And it was working for a German business that had, frankly, an extremely inspiring co-founder, and the role would give me an opportunity to work very closely side by side with one of the co-founders in London as the business looked to set up its London office. And so for all of those reasons, it just felt like an extremely exciting opportunity.
And that move into a more commercial, I presume, as you joined Chow, you were much more in a sales role than an analytical role.
I was, and it was probably one of many sort of forks in the road that I've, I guess, navigated through my career. So that was the first of those. So I was in a kind of research analyst role. A lot of that was around sort of delivery and fulfillment of value. In that case, data coupled with sort of commentary and analysis. The move to Chow would see me take a very commercial role, essentially becoming sales director and being the sort of boots on the ground for the Munich HQ business. And it entailed doing everything from setting up the limited company through to, finding a serviced office, starting with a phone and a phone book and making calls to try and, start to build a pipeline and a set of customers and a revenue stream. So, alien to what I'd been doing.
Yeah.
But the thrill of the chase sort of excited me.
Yeah.
Leaning into something new and, dare I say, getting me completely out of my comfort zone from where I'd been, but knowing I had this sort of almost comfort blanket of the co-founder being based with me that I could learn from, actually that individual, someone I would now deem a sort of coach and mentor, and we've kept in touch ever since. So yeah, that was one of the first forks in terms of, do I stay down the sort of research analyst kind of slash broader research path? Do I pivot and go into a sort of commercial path? I guess the other choice would have been to go down the operational route. And I decided to go down the commercial route. And I felt that the fundamentals I'd learned in the consulting role would serve me well because and time has shown that actually sales in market research is very consultative. It's about really understanding customer needs and requirements, being able to translate and interpret those, and being very consultative in problem solving and unpicking challenges. And so, those 4 years at Cap Ventures, the name of the business where I was a research analyst, were a fantastic sort of set of building blocks that I could then sort of reapply and build on at Ciao.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of consistency in speaking with lots of successful salespeople in this industry, that bedding in of core research understanding is really important. Knowing exactly the process of the thing you're selling is really, really useful. And then the Chow journey was an exhilarating, successful one. What were some of those key highlights, the milestones that you really knew you were making progress in your career, but also with the business?
Yeah, so I joined at an interesting point. It was around 25, 30 employees in Munich. It had taken on venture capital, so it had, a decent amount of headroom in terms of funding behind it. And it was really embarking on sort of international expansion, starting with mainland EMEA markets. And so extremely exciting time to sort of join the business. I didn't have the domain expertise, but I had some, as you say, research sort of fundamentals that I think would serve the business more broadly well. And it was an extremely exciting period, not just to be within Chow, but actually for the industry, because it was when the dot-com bubble had, that recently burst. But there was a huge move or shift from offline to online. And it was at the very start of that sort of journey or transition in data collection within the market research space, and an extremely, yeah, large wave to sort of ride in those sort of first few years with the business. So I was there from '03 to '08. During that time, we raised more money. We were acquired and taken public as well by Greenfield Online. So I had the opportunity to experience what it was like working in a public environment with the sort of governance and compliance and expectations that come with that. And then we were taken private again. So it was, a roller coaster in a sort of 5.5 year period, but also one of explosive growth. We were able to capitalize on the market opportunity. And the UK business that I set up, within 6 months, I had I think, team of almost 10 people. Within the first 12 months, we were up to about 20, 25 people in the London office. And it felt like a real business. We had, different functions here locally, not just, a sales arm. And at that point, I was then sort of moved on to the management team. And there I was at the age of, I think, 28, as a European managing director, responsible for about 200 employees across our European offices. Probably far too much responsibility for
Yeah,
someone my age and with the lack of experience I had. But, sink or swim, right? And,
yeah,
and actually, I think that probably, again, was a pivotal moment in my career that sort of validated the decision I'd made to join the business, but also elevated me beyond I think probably what I felt my capabilities were, And as a result, I had to really step up and sort of lean into that. And I think that was a good thing.
Yeah, it seems there's a real theme here that you are most comfortable being in an uncomfortable
Think
situation
so.
in your
Yeah.
career, and looking back, your next move, many would say, was the absolute masterstroke of your career. You're running a team of 200. You're on top of the world. You've been through this incredible journey. You're no doubt being well looked after, and you go and join these guys with a vision and not much else.
Yeah, it wasn't probably the most sort of obvious move, was it, at the time? There was some context to it though. So in '08, Ciao Surveys, which was a survey arm of the Ciao Group, it had a very successful price comparison sort of e-commerce business. That was being acquired by Microsoft. Actually, the e-commerce technology would ultimately roll up into what is now Bing, the search engine. And so there was a sort of, I guess, natural point at which to sort of exit. And I just felt I'd run my race at Ciao. I'd done everything I wanted to accomplish within that business. It had given me a really good grounding in digital kind of data collection. But I felt I wanted to continue on that sort of journey. And so the opportunity with Cint came along because they were a client of Chow's. So I got to know some of the team in Stockholm. I got to know Bo Matson, the founder of Cint, quite well, and we built up good chemistry and rapport, which is often extremely sort of critical, and it's often the differentiation in terms of why you make a decision to join a business. It's about people and the leadership of that organisation. So I got to know sort of Cint from afar. I have to profess, I never really understood their business model. It was a bit of a black box in terms of what they were trying to do, right? And I can say now it was way ahead of its time in terms of this sort of two-sided marketplace, and back then this kind of DIY or self-service model. Market research for the previous 30 to 35 years had been a very heavily service-based value chain and industry. People delivered, not technology. And here was this kind of warm, fluffy, lovely, friendly Scandinavian business trying to like turn the industry on its head and apply principles from the financial sectors in terms of an exchange kind of model to a very, if not archaic, traditional and well set kind of value chain and way of working. So it intrigued me.
Yeah,
I definitely needed to understand more, but I had the chance, and there was a window of opportunity here because I was exiting Chow
yeah,
with the transaction. I decided to head to Asia and spend a month meeting up with my brother actually, who was still traveling and doing his thing. And then I felt I would come back and start to sort of look for a new job in earnest. But Bo called. He said, "Look, get on a flight to Stockholm. You won't be disappointed. You can meet the board. You can meet a few of the team." Creandum, actually, one of the
yeah,
early investors in Spotify, was just coming on to lead the Series A, and the investment would be used for international expansion. It was a playbook I'd seen at Chow.
yeah.
I'd already done that once before, so I felt I'd had a bit of direct experience and sort of leverage that I could bring to the table. So I took that flight from London to Stockholm. I had two whirlwind days in Stockholm with Bo and the team,
Yeah.
and that decided it for me. It was a huge risk, right? Because I was going from a well-paid job. With a high profile, managing, a lot of fantastic people on a business that was still on an upward trajectory, to join a company that was very much a scrappy sort of startup,
Yeah.
albeit now had raised funds successfully. But a lot of unknowns, and a lot of risk associated with what I would be asked to do, which was take the proposition, scale it in the UK, and then there was a discussion early on that I would have the opportunity to sort of get into a global role and hopefully onto the management team. So that was the big carrot for me, and the ambition.
Yeah, and Richard, many of us that have worked in startups know that growth is not linear, and I'm guessing along the way there were numerous challenges on the Cint journey. Any that really stand out that were almost hurdles too big to get over, but eventually you were able to knock them down, certainly in the earlier years of the Cint journey?
Yeah, look, I mean, Christ, we probably wrote the playbook on what mistakes to make, along the way in that journey. I remember vividly one moment where it was, sort of make or break. We just raised a Series B round, quite a material amount of money following the sort of earlier Creandum round. And, we felt very good about that. And suddenly we had, a lot of capital at our disposal to go and deploy and invest and continue with this sort of international expansion theme. And we did, but we did it extremely aggressively and very quickly. And, from running Walr and scaling this business, that at some point there's only so much a business can consume in terms of the number of people you bring on board, the number of onboarding processes you have going on, the number of offices you're owning at any given time. And at some point, unless you've got the right frameworks and structure and tools in place, things start to break, or they start to sort of bend and wobble. And that's certainly the case. At Cint, about 2.5, 3 years into my journey there. So we had the challenging task of kind of rowing back, scaling back in terms of costs, which, unfortunately, that means people, and making some very, very difficult decisions. Um, Time told us that actually they were the right ones, but nevertheless, it's that's the sort of hardest part of being a manager, I think, in any role is those difficult decisions where you're dealing with real people, real emotions, and that was a huge learning curve.
Yeah.
When I look back, and hopefully we didn't repeat that sort of going forward. But yeah, there was a lot of bumps in the road.
And talk to me, Richard, about some of the personal opportunities the journey created for you, different roles, different locations you're able to live in, and as all great British museum musicians try and do, conquering America eventually became your task, I understand. So tell us a bit about the personal side.
Yeah, it did. Look, I'm extremely grateful to have had an amazing opportunity to travel the world. Spent a huge amount of time in Asia and particularly Southeast Asia. Got to go to Australia handful of times to help open an office there in Sydney. A lot of time in the US. Actually, a colleague, Oscar Carlson, had been sent there initially to Atlanta to establish the first Cint office and tap into the technology universities there and the talent pool. My task sort of later on was to establish an office in California. So had the opportunity to move the family to San Francisco and spent a year there setting up an office, hiring a team and working in the US market, which was fantastic. Always been a huge fan of the US, and to get to experience it and live there and have the opportunity to take the family there was just a delight. And probably, I look back on that as one of the most fondest 12 months of my entire career, but certainly my tenure at Cint. Got to travel across EMEA, helped set up offices in some of our major markets there. But the one highlight for me, the one that stands out, is probably Japan and Tokyo. Very lucky to have been there numerous times, myself and a Japanese colleague who actually started with Cint in Stockholm. Set up the Tokyo office, hired the initial kind of cohort of the founding team, and that to me was magical. And if there's anything I miss actually from sort of the operational world, it is that aspect of travel and the opportunity you get to meet great people in new countries. And that was definitely a key theme for me. That probably was a big reason as well in terms of that variety and diversity of what kept me at both Ciao initially for 6 years and then Cint for nigh on 13 years.
Wow. No, I think we're so lucky as an industry. Market research is so international. The great beauty of working for international businesses is they want to compare and contrast what people do in other countries. And I think that gives great opportunity for researchers of all levels to really see the world through this industry, which is a great perk. So you finished the fairy tale at Cint with the crescendo that I think all companies set out to try and achieve, which is the IPO. Not many of us live through a IPO at any point of our career, let alone in market research. So give us a bit of insight from being on the ground, where the idea of an IPO comes from, and some of the work that goes into executing a successful IPO.
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting one because when I just taking a step back for a second, when I joined Ciao, um, we were acquired by Greenfield Online, so I'd had sort of some experience of seeing what an IPO looked like post transaction and sort of the fallout of that. But I clearly had never been involved in sort of a transaction leading up to an IPO event. So I was, fortunate to be sort of in that seat at Cint. Actually, as an organisation, once the decision had been made to sort of take the company public, we split the leadership team essentially into two. One would focus on operations and ensuring that the business continued to sort of run day to day, and ensure that trading was as strong as it could be, which is obviously extremely important in the lead up to such an event. And then we created a sort of IPO team, and I was sort of put onto the IPO team. I think partly because I'd been discussions with the business regarding exiting with the IPO, so it was already known that I would be sort of leaving with that event. So I was, tasked with helping, I guess, curate the story, right? And storytelling and building that narrative is the sort of backbone of a successful process. So a lot of time in sort of dark rooms, kind of literally doing page turns on management, investor decks and teasers, and sort of a part of that team that would help shape, I guess, how the business was going to be positioned to the market and to the analysts. So that was exciting because it was quite a creative work stream of a number of work streams, as you can imagine, that were sort of underway. I should state as well that this was at a time when we had the small thing of COVID,
Yeah.
and clearly a lot of sort of limitations or restrictions in how we were able to move around and sort of engage and converse. So Cint was probably one of the first businesses and one of the few at the time that was pretty much running a purely digital kind of IPO process, save for a handful of sort of meetings that were able to be done kind of physically. So that added a degree of complexity and sort
Sure.
of number of unknowns as well in terms of logistics. Like any IPO process, Cint appointed investment bank to help quarterback it. Jeffries ran, the process and sort of consulted and advised. And for me, that was excellent because you get access to some amazing bright minds, some extremely sharp individuals, and you learn a lot in those processes. You really see what good or best practice looks like in terms of A, how to run a process, but B, how to strategize around positioning and sort of that storytelling component. So my role really was to sort of contribute towards, I guess, the sort of outward facing positioning of the business, which made sense because I was at the coalface of Cint, in my CCO role, had spent a lot of time, on the go to market, talking to customers, understanding the sentiment of the value we were delivering and where the opportunities lied. And so, having an opportunity to sort of impart, I guess, that insight and put that lens on the process was exciting and I guess played to my strengths as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. So I guess 13 years later, you were pretty glad you took the call and jumped on the plane to go and see
I
Bert in
was
Stockholm.
extremely glad. Yeah, these things sort of tend to sort of hopefully work out for a reason, and that was, looking back, one of the tipping points for me in my career, without a doubt.
And life, being able to take your family to America and so on,
Exactly, absolutely, yeah,
inspired
yeah.
decision. So life post Cint, tell us a little bit about what keeps you busy these days. Not quite as executively hands-on, I understand.
No, I'm not. And I made a conscious decision actually, which I'd already sort of come to prior to exiting Cint. I wanted to go plural and
Yeah.
pursue a portfolio kind of approach to work. And honestly, just being candid, part of that was just selfishly to claw some time back for myself. for kind of my mental health and mindset, but also for my family. I mean, you'll know, Lewis, as much as it's exciting to be able to, and fortunate to travel the world and get all of these opportunities that market research and the industry provides us, there's compromises or there's a downside of that. And often that is to the detriment of time you can spend with family and kids. And, as much as I loved, working in the industry and particularly the journey at Cint, it was not without compromise at home. So I said, look, I want to do something where I can, be a bit more selective and hopefully get myself in a position where I'm fortunate to sort of cherry pick to an extent who I can work with, the types of businesses I can work with. And part of this is about sort of paying back as well. So, taking, I guess, the 25 years of experience and knowledge and all the mistakes, and pitfalls that sort of I fell into and made, and trying to help, founders and management teams and commercial teams to avoid those and show them kind of hopefully what good practice looks like in terms of taking a startup or a scale up business and sort of globalizing that and then optimizing it to the value of sort of customers and partners. And so that's what I do today. I made that leap of faith, and I today work with four, I would say, scale up stage technology companies in and around the research technology sector, all at slightly different parts of the value chain. And I'm an advisor or a NED, non-exec director, and on the board of those businesses. I've had the opportunity to invest alongside my sort of board seat and advisory roles. So I've got skin in the game as well, which I think is extremely important as an advisor. And then the second hat I wear is I'm an operating partner for a Nordic-based early-stage VC fund, and the connection there is Bo Matson. So Bo was the founder of Cint, as we've discussed, and he's a partner at J12 Ventures, which is the name of the Nordic-based fund. And I love that role because it's a really nice complement to the advisory work that I do in ResTech, albeit in slightly earlier stage companies, but actually a lot of the opportunities and problems and sort of the guiding principles remain the same. So I've sort of got myself 3 years in now almost to a point where I'm able to cross-pollinate quite nicely amongst the businesses, but also bridge into the J12 world, which is much more of an investor lens. And that's been fantastic because intellectually that's challenging, it's very stimulating, and it's been a huge learning curve. I was always on this side of the table pitching for funds with my sort of cap out, and actually J12 gives me and affords me the opportunity to look at that scenario from the investor side and actually what goes through an investor's mind when trying to determine whether one should invest or not and back a business with a high degree of risk given how early on some of these businesses are. So that's sort of the world I live in today, and I love it. I have to say I absolutely love it.
And Richard, one thing that always strikes me as a challenge in our industry is I think there's a lot of incredible ideas that don't necessarily get themselves into being businesses, and there is maybe a bit of a disconnect between that sort of entrepreneurial connection with ideas. You clearly, particularly with J12, invest very early into organizations where maybe there is just an idea.
Yeah.
Beyond that idea, what are you looking for? If someone's going to come to you and say, hey, I want to change a world, we can all say that, but what are the more tangible elements that excite you to get involved in businesses in that early stage?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's something that the J12 team discusses daily. J12 is an early stage investor, and by default that means it will take high risk decisions in ideas and concepts. Sometimes the fund will invest in pre-revenue, sort of MVP technology companies. More often than not, it likes to invest in businesses where at least the founder and the sort of early team have done some evidencing, whether that necessarily be a full product market fit or at least have some form of technology that is being used. But what J12 is investing in is conviction in primarily the founding team. So it's very much a people-led investment thesis. It's being able to look founders in the eyes and understand, what conviction they have first and foremost in their own idea, and are they ready to, go the whole, mile in terms of building that business. And part of that is understanding that great companies take a long time to build. You know, okay, there's outliers, but normally 10 to 20 years is kind of a good time frame in which to build a business that is scaled, demonstrated beyond, doubt, great market fit, has, a good diverse set of customers and, a solid, growing revenue stream. And a lot of founders, perhaps want the shortcut to success, and have that sort of idea of, maybe a 3 to 5 year stint. They'll get that wonderful exit and the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And, we both know it very rarely works out like that.
Yeah.
So, understanding that mindset of, are you genuinely in it for the long haul? Like, do you really understand and have what it takes to put in the hard yards and the compromises that we were just talking about to make your idea, your business, the success you believe it can be? If you do, fantastic. We're more than prepared to lock arms with you and be part of that journey as a sort of financial sponsor and I guess kind of strategic kind of support. So that's probably the
Yeah.
first hurdle is, can we get enough comfort in you as a founder or a founding team? And do you have as much conviction as we do in your idea? Secondly, of course, it's the basic fundamentals of, there needs to be a large addressable market.
Sure.
There needs to be either some previous expertise in the market you're about to attack, or at least some adjacency from a founder or sort of team perspective. And then thirdly, does it excite us as a founder? So we have a thesis with Fund 2 that's very much narrowed down now to sort of AI and data, or data infrastructure. And so clearly there has to be sort of a resonance with, that as a sector or set of sectors. And then, it has to have the potential to be what I call venture velocity. So that's not, it's a business we think you could grow to 25, 50, 100 million. It's a business we think you can get to 1 billion and a valuation that's way beyond that. You have to think that
Sure.
big,
Yeah.
to be able to have the conviction to invest. So all of those sort of factors and variables come into play when making investment decisions.
Yeah. But it sounds like really that core is making sure the individual pitching it believes in it beyond anything, that it can get there.
Exactly that. And that's, to me, increasingly the differentiation, right? You have to bear in mind, and J12 probably sees, fewer decks than, later stage VCs and PE firms, certainly, but you're getting pitched, multiple times a day,
Yes.
probably seeing 100 plus decks a month. And you're looking for points of differentiation and are people cutting through the noise and and it's individuals that tend to do that. Perhaps arguably more so than business ideas. So in the end, it's the coupling of the two, of course, but it's very much a people first kind of investment thesis at an early stage.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic, Richard. It's fascinating throughout your career the amount of individuals and connections that you've put trust in, and that they've paid you back later in your career. To get a bit deep and meaningful, thinking back to your childhood, are there any sort of standout moments that you can link through from learnings in your childhood or experiences that have set you up in your career?
A few things perhaps that I believe have sort of been ingrained in me and made me who I am today, and how I've been in the business world, because I would consider myself a little bit on the obsessive side, highly driven, hopefully somebody who brings a lot of energy. That, I think, was born from the fact I'm one of six. So, it was kind of pack mentality and, sort of everyone is on their own type sort of environment, being, having five of the siblings. So that, I think, lent me some good skills and particularly resilience growing up. I also, just being candid, was motivated having flunked out of uni the first time. So I actually went to study and left after the first term in my first chance of going to university. And that felt like a huge failure. I know my parents were absolutely disappointed because I'd seen my two eldest siblings go to university and successfully graduate. It was looking very likely my younger three siblings would do the same, and here I was, potentially as the black sheep in the family that wouldn't do that. So that was a pivotal time in my life. I was 18, I didn't really know what I necessarily wanted. So I ended up, working in Cambridge in a jean shop for a year, and it was extremely liberating. I didn't have any woes or worries. I had cash in my pocket. I had a wonderful time.
Yeah.
And actually, that sort of encouraged me to sort of clear my head. And I went back to uni a year later and making the right decision in terms of the course, the location, and got myself into a great environment. And from that point, really haven't looked back. So I think sometimes you've got to kind of embrace those failures, right? And sort of almost see them as each one is kind of a path to hopefully future success. And that would be one of my big ones, really.
So to finish off, Richard, we're going to go into some quick fire questions. We've spoken a lot about 18-year-old Richard today. What do you wish you knew then that you know now?
Wow. God, a lot. So if I think about what I believe are good traits or characteristics, or at least from a mindset perspective, are going to put you in good stead in career life, I would say so. Networking is very important. I've not particularly done it always that well, actually, despite sort of, I guess, me being very driven and sort of having a lot of energy. I'm a bit of an introvert, actually. So networking was always a scary thing to me. But I think actually to succeed and sort of work your way up the professional ladder, you talking about embracing, you have to embrace networking is a key part of working life. And that sort of social aspect is a very good kind of complement to what one does at their desk. And I think if I had the chance again, I would have embraced networking and the sort of socializing aspect of one's career a lot more than I did. I wasn't a wallflower, but equally I could have lent in a lot more, particularly later on in my career. So that would be one thing: is understand the value of networking.
Indeed.
And actually the importance of keeping your network relevant and recent as
Yeah.
well, because it's very easy to get lazy. And so I would really encourage anyone about to embark on their career to understand that sort of networking, both in the office, but also outside of the office, more broadly in the industry, can open a lot of doors and a
Yeah.
lot of opportunity. Be positive, be present, but be happy fundamentally more than anything, right? Make decisions that are going to make you happy, right? And that's not necessarily the decision that's going to mean you're paid the most, right? But make the decisions for the right reasons,
Sure.
which I think is very, very important.
And moving things on a little bit to career hacks for people to get on there in their careers. What sort of things stand out in terms of great hacks to develop quickly?
Not sure if they're hacks as such. I mean, like hard work, positive mindset, just good attitude are sort of kind of underrated. Like they will get you a damn long way, right? And talk about differentiation. Like it, they're just great principles to have and values to keep. And for me, they're sort of undercooked for like technical skills or what's perhaps written on one's CV far too often. So come with a positive mindset and be prepared to contribute, right?
Yeah.
More than your role states in your job description. And that means socially to the business, to the culture. So I think that will open doors. I think surround yourself with good people, smart people. I did that through all stages of my career to the point where I was never the smartest one in the room. And that's actually good because it's a humbling seat to sit in and it keeps you hungry. And it allows you to learn a huge amount of those around you, right? And as a manager, I used to sort of try and hire on the potential that they would ultimately be more than capable to do my role. So you sort of almost get yourself into a bit of an uncomfortable position with that hire, because again, it just sharpens a pencil on everything you do. So surround yourself with good people,
Yeah.
and the people that I think are going to diversify your own thinking. Diversity of thinking is so important in the work environment, and thinking about how you can add that to yourself is really key. So they would be a few things that I think will serve you well over a longer period of time.
Fantastic. Lastly, on this series, office, company culture, one non-negotiable to making great office and company cultures.
I think a sort of non-negotiable is, in today's environment, to be successful as a team, I think there has to be a commitment to being in the office for a degree of time.
Yeah.
I'm a huge supporter of hybrid working, but I think to get the best out of us as individuals and sort of people, having a commitment to spend time with colleagues in an office is key. The other non-negotiable is, if team lunch is called, you damn well make it, because it's a chance to build a rapport, contribute towards the culture, and also grow your profile within an organization. And there's too many lame excuses, and it's too easy to kind of dodge these types of sort of social events within an organization. I think if everyone committed to those, culture and team and businesses would be far better off for it.
Fantastic. And last but not least, what comes next for Richard Thornton?
Oh God, a holiday in a couple of weeks
Wonderful.
is in the immediate horizon. No, beyond that, I'm content, very content with sort of what I'm doing today. Never say never in terms of perhaps taking on an additional commitment or two on the advisory side. I don't know if I've shut the door completely to going back in operationally somewhere.
Wow.
It would have to be um, all of the stars aligning, I think, at this moment in time, whilst my two kids are at the age they're at, but never say never. But for now, it's continuing with J12, continuing the advisory roles with the 4 businesses that I'm fortunate to work with. And on the side, I'm sort of continuing to invest as well, which is becoming hairier with the sort of emergence of AI and the disruption that is underway with that. But that's really from a sort of working perspective, what's I guess on the horizon for the next 2 to 3 years for me.
Fantastic. Richard, thank you so much. Incredibly insightful, detailed, and impressive story you have to tell. And I think our viewers will really enjoy a lot of those nuggets to how to really get on in their career and go with the flow and have some incredible experiences by taking some big bets and some big risks and trusting some great people and turning into a really great story. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.